Hey folks, this is the Fighting Nerd and his co-host Jolly Roger coming to you from the Resistance Bunker. Do you study a martial art or a fighting system? Yeah, there is a difference. All right, first of all, martial art. We're talking about a highly structured, ritualized, usually quite old, but not always, art form with a martial aspect. There is always a fighting system within a martial art, but you can study a fighting system and it's not necessarily a martial art. Now, I suppose that's a little murky, but not really. Let's look at it this way. Some of the highly stylized kung fu forms, the old animal-based systems, praying mantis, uh, crane, tiger, have a very specific form, a set of forms that students must learn, a ranking system, and a system of martial courtesy that students adhere to. And it's the same thing with karate styles like Shotokan, Isshin-ryu, uh, Goju-ryu, uh, kata-based systems, right, with the belt ranking style, the belt ranking system, and the specific set of courtesy. Now, way back in the day, uh, my first exposure to martial arts was Isshin-ryu in the dojo in Cambridge, Ohio, which has long since gone out of business. And when we would come in, before we would begin training, we would bow to the American flag out of patriotism, to the Okinawan flag, the origin country of our art, right? And we would bow before we before we actually stepped into the training area, because once we got into that training area, we really weren't supposed to be thinking or talking about anything but training in Isshin-ryu, right? And of course, we called our instructors sir. There was the aforementioned bowing. And the point of that is that it was a set of courtesy and discipline that went along with learning to fight. We had the katas that had to be very specifically done. The individual blocks were done in a very traditional way. Yet, when we got on the sparring floor, most of what was in the kata went out the window. And aside from bowing at the beginning and end of every match, it was about developing skill for self-protection. Then you have a fighting system, like, say, Krav Maga in its original form. I've never had any training in Krav Maga, but I think it's a good illustration of a fighting system. Now, as it progresses from its roots, it seems to be becoming, a lot of ways, from what I understand, more structuralized, and it is actually becoming a martial art. But Krav Maga at its core is a fighting system. Now, I have done a lot of research on Krav Maga with books, DVDs, and videos, because I would really like to get some formal training in Krav Maga. But at its root, it was designed for the Israeli Defense Forces to be very quick to learn and brutally effective in a military context and later in a police context, and only secondarily as a civilian-based fighting system. And it's still, and though they have adopted a kind of ranking system in some schools, as I understand, it is still designed to be brutally effective, and it's an efficiency in actual combat that is stressed without all the ritualization and set katas and forms. Nothing is wrong with true martial art, and nothing is wrong with the fighting system, but I think people have to be aware of the difference. Because not everybody is going to have the inclination, the patience, and the discipline to train in a martial art where when you go to that dojo, it's almost a quasi-military environment with the sirs and the ranks and the bowing and all the rules of courtesy. Now those rules are very useful because those, if you have the discipline to go through that, you probably have the discipline to learn the fighting forms and fighting methods well. But a true martial art isn't always practical for, say, police or military, or even a civilian who just needs to learn how to protect themselves relatively quickly and without a lot of extraneous, time-consuming traditions. Now, if you take a military and police context, they have a lot of other skills they have to learn other than close combat with their hands and knives and things like that. Above all, their primary combat skill is going to be their firearm. And in the case of police, they have to master pepper spray. And while there's not a lot of physical skill that goes along with that, there is a lot of training to cover themselves legally for its use. And the same thing goes with the taser. They have to have time to train with their taser. They have to certify in most cases with whatever type of impact weapon they carry. And that's on top of knowing the law, accident investigation, CPR, and all the other things that police officers have to know and have to learn in order to do their job and to keep their job. They don't have time to spend years studying a heavily ritualized martial art. Now, some do that on their own time. They find value in it, and in some cases, even spiritual benefits for training in a true martial art. But not all of them do. For your average street cop, all he really wants to know from a fighting system is A, how to keep from getting hurt or killed, and B, getting the guy on the ground and cuffed. That's it. That's all he really needs to know, and a lot of the time, all he has time to learn. In the military context, it's even simpler and in some ways more complicated, because in a lot of the times you're going to be studying lethal techniques. And if you have to use those techniques, it's usually mean you've already screwed up, because you can't use your firearm, you can't use a knife or a grenade or whatever, the myriad weapons that they have available in the military. It's down and dirty, and it has to be quick to learn, and the skills have to be gross motor skills that are easy to maintain. Now, for instance, you have what they call Marine Corps martial arts. Now, in my mind, that system isn't a martial art. It is a fighting system, and it seems to be a very good fighting system from what I've read about it. And it does have a ranking system. But other than the military courtesy that all Marines have to show each other just because they're Marines, it's not a true martial art. And the reason I think this distinction is important is because not all of the traditional martial arts have a core fighting system that is truly effective in a real-world confrontation. Those core fighting systems do teach fundamentals that are useful in a real fight. But ritualized katas and everything are, although they may be beneficial as for teaching certain attributes that are useful, as a whole, they are not useful in the real world. And also, they have a set of rules that you follow in the dojo as a matter of courtesy and as a matter of safety that may not transfer very well over to the real thing. So if you're into personal protection and you're studying a martial art or a fighting system, I think it's pretty critical to know where martial arts end and fighting system begins, and how that they cycle back for each other. You can be a martial artist and not have any intention of ever using it for self-defense. You might not even ever think about it. It might be a way to stay fit. It might have spiritual value. It might be a cultural thing where you're studying the martial arts, and you go into the dojo with that mindset, right? And you can have a fighting system. On the other hand, the fighting system, if you're studying a fighting system, chances are you are concerned about personal protection and possibly fitness as a benefit, right? But most fighting systems have their beginnings in a martial art. So you have to take being a martial artist and being a fighter and know where that line of separation is. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I think an individual that is involved in learning such skills needs to understand the benefits and the drawbacks and the difference between the two, because there is brutal practicality of a fighting system, and there's the elegance and the tradition of a martial art. I think that they are both very valuable. But in the self-protection martial arts world right now, there's well, not even right now, always this, this is, judo's better than jujitsu, jujitsu's better than kung fu, Wing Chun's better than taekwondo, whatever. And it's starting to get that way between a martial art and a fighting system. A lot of people criticize MMA, which is a fighting system, for not being a true martial art. And they say that as a criticism, and it shouldn't be a criticism. The people who practice MMA practice it to go into that cage. That's what it's for. A lot of them are also martial artists, but their martial arts really stop when they go into that cage, because they have taken the martial art core, the martial core of their martial art, and completely removed it from the artistic and traditional setting, entered it into a fighting system. And if you don't know the difference, then you're not going to get full benefit out of either one. That's my basic point. Bit of a ramble, but I hope it's food for thought. And again, my standard disclaimer: I am not an expert in martial arts. I am not an expert in any fighting system. I am not an expert in combat. I am not an expert in anything but not being an expert. But I hope I've gotten people to think. And if you're just thinking about getting into a martial art or learning a fighting system, hopefully you'll understand the difference in choose a martial art or a fighting system that is suited for your needs. Because if you're just afraid of being accosted on the street, by some Antifa idiot because you're wearing a Make America Great hat? Or do you want something that is going to help you build discipline and spiritual strength, camaraderie with your class, and make you part of an ongoing tradition that maybe you have gone on for hundreds or thousands of years? If that's important to you, find yourself a good martial art. One of the well-established ones, the Shotokan, the Isshin-Rus, the Goju-Rus, the Kung Fu systems, or something of that sort. On the other hand, if you're just worried about personal protection because you live in a bad neighborhood, then you might start thinking about just taking a solid self-protection seminar somewhere, or looking into something like, say, Krav Maga or even MMA. That's it. Like I said, I hope it makes you think. This is the Fighting Nerd and his co-host, Jolly Roger. I bid you words to remember that words make history, and I bid you good night from the Resistance Bunker.